So this video has been requested for quite some time, whether that's a top 10 video of various characters of the Arrowverse or just villains, but I wanted to put it down to specifically the Flash today, as you can tell from the title. And as for who we're ranking today, we are ranking the villains. Now obviously this can't be a top 10 as there are only so far 6 seasons of the Flash, and for this video I only wanted to rank the main villains for each season up against each other. I mean, I could do another video going into the villains of the week as well, which, you know, could include anyone from Ragdoll, Trickster, Grodd, and countless others, but I really wanted to tackle the big cheeses, so to speak, and that is from Eobard Thawne's Reverse Flash, to Zoom, to Sabotar, Clifford DeVoe, aka The Thinker, Cicada, and Bloodwork. Now I would have included the newest edition, an iteration of Mirror Master, if you will, in Ava McCulloch, but due to the series being cut short this season with only 19 episodes in season 6, I can't exactly fairly put her up against the other villains with her antagonist back half role incomplete. But I'll also be going through why I think they should be in each ranking they are. Now obviously some of this will come down to personal preference, as I know many of you will want to put Cicada at number 1, but I'm just sorry, spoiler alert, I'm really sorry, but I just don't feel that way. So for this video, I'll be starting in reverse order, and what I would love to hear from all of you down in the comment section is your reply with your own unique order, and if you have the time as well, tell me why that you've ranked them in your certain way. So without further ado, let's begin with number 6, and that is Zoom. I mean, no really, Orlin Dwyer, Cicada. Now I think mostly everyone who is watching this right now knows why this season 5 villain has been put in last place. I mean, overall, when you compare Cicada to the likes of all of the other main villains that this show has had, in quality he just doesn't really even come close. I understand as well that there can be other failings that lead to an opinion of a season not really being all that great in comparison to other seasons, but as for this villain and this season, Cicada really did fall short all by himself. And while there was what I thought to be quite a half-decent background story behind the motivation of Cicada of, you know, which his niece Grace arrived at his doorstep after her parents passed away, initially this was very much so a burden to Orlin Dwyer, who didn't really want that responsibility, but eventually they forged a close family bond with each other, for only then the end results of season 4's main villain, DeVoe's satellite, to wreak havoc on some citizens of Central City, with a shard of the satellite actually hitting Orlin Dwyer and also putting Grace into a coma. From that point, you could also say it's a bit of a jump to then want to go round and kill every single last metahuman in the world, whether they use their powers for crime or not, but they even added a bit of a story to that with Orlin's link to Grace in a coma, making him even more angry or something like that. But either way, Chris Klein didn't exactly nail the role for a lot of people. I mean, at times, to be fair to him, I thought that he did okay, but overall, the portrayal he gave consistently came off as overacted and even borderline cringy at times. And that kind of made a lot of fans not be able to take the main threat of the season too seriously. And honestly, I don't mean to sound harsh there, it's just, you know what I mean with the constant smoldering that kept occurring through Orlin Dwyer's face throughout the season. It was just that element of cheese. So the writing for this season in relation to this villain as well was just way too ludicrous to take seriously at the same time. This ranges from Cicada getting away from Team Flash more times than I can count. Actually, in fact, there is compilation clips of the amount of times he managed to get away with the assistance of his flying dagger, and if you actually sit back and watch one of those compilation clips, it's really hard to believe your eyes how many times they actually let that happen. His dagger was just insanely overpowered as well, even removing powers from Team Flash, but then also in other episodes it operating very contradictory and sometimes not even removing their powers in certain other episodes, even when operating in the exact same fashion. There was another Cicada as well, which was Grace and the new iteration of Cicada, but that like sophistication they tried to add into it really just didn't add anything at all in my mind, and just all in all, as intimidating of a villain as Cicada was intended with his very angry poses and dark brooding costume, he came off more irritating and annoying more than anything, and when you compare that to some other villains of this series, well, that definitely deserves last place. Now, number 5. Who is number 5? That is Sabotar. Now, this was quite an interesting one for me to rank because I feel as though, as I stated earlier, most people watching this will understand why Cicada is in last place. So to be the next villain up from Cicada is quite a sting for any of the others. And from my broad outlook on all of the other villains, I've actually enjoyed them a heck of a lot more than Cicada. But this place had to go to someone, and that is none other than the pizza face Barry Sabotar. Now, his here's the interesting thing when it comes to Sabotar. I love the concept of this character, and one of my favorite episodes of The Flash to memory is actually from season 3 Sabotar storyline titled The Once and Future Flash, where Barry traveled into the future to see where things ended up after Iris's death. And I love time travel, I'm sure all of us do, so when we get to take a peek into the future with a darker Barry like this, I mean, it was pretty awesome. However, with The Flash, and in this case this applies to a lot of shows and movies, time travel stories are usually a bit hit and miss with their logic. And season 3's main villain being that he centered around an alternative time-traveled evil iteration of Barry Allen, for most it was unfortunately a miss. But for me, guess what? I really like this villain, but also at the same time, the reason why Sabotar sits at number 5 is because he truly just doesn't deserve a higher spot than the other villains we'll discuss because of the issues that were present with his character in season 3, and I think that's a shame because the concept of Sabotar is honestly fantastic to me, and I'm a sucker for these kinds of villains and stories, but it just wasn't handled the greatest way. So Sabotar, at least from my perspective, didn't really suffer from any cringy angles unlike the former ranked villain Cicada, even though some may disagree with that. I actually really liked the reveal of Grant Gustin's darker Barry. I also really enjoyed the tone of this season, with it actually being my favorite tone. I mean, of course some may view it too dark, but for me it was just the perfect level of drama, stake, and consequences for a season of The Flash that just felt perfect after tackling another menacing speedster in season 2. However, Sabotar was revealed way too late in the season, and that's a huge shame. I feel just like a lot of other people, if they introduced his reveal much earlier in the season, there would have been a lot more to play from the darker portrayal that Grant Gustin was doing as this disregarded time remnant future version of himself. And I'm also of two minds when it comes to the suit. I thought it practically looked a lot better than what it did in the CGI form, but I really wasn't a fan of the big beak mode that Sabotar kept going into every now and again when his mouth just kept opening like a bird and just letting out a massive bird cry. It was just weird. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are expecting this. There was just also quite a bit that didn't necessarily add up to a lot of the audience. Most fans were ultimately left feeling very confused with the whole plot, with the whole was it the chicken or the egg that came first in relation to Sabotar's creation. Now, I suppose this is where my ranking explanations of this video somewhat kind of bleeds into a season ranking critique, but ultimately the execution, in a similar regard to Cicada, but almost more so sorely felt here with Sabotar due to the fantastic concept, left a lot lacking for this villain. Well, who's up next? I'm sure some of you have a few guesses because it honestly could be one of two, and I had a bit of trouble with this, but number 4 is Bloodwork. I'm sure from here it's going to get even somewhat predictable who sits in number 1 and number 2, but then again maybe not, because those two villains usually come very close to each other for a lot of people for when it comes to who is the best villain. But before we get into that, Bloodwork, well, this one is kind of easy for me to answer, and the reason I say that is because in season 6, for the first time we've had a split up season with essentially 2 main overarching villains, the first being Bloodwork, and that allowed an opportunity for this villain to be fairly solid. So we haven't had 22 episodes dedicated to this villain, but we did get quite the cohesive, consistent, main plot driven first 8 episodes of The Flash season 6, which felt very engaging compared to that of the typical main villain being scattered throughout the what feels like dragged out season sometimes when it comes to pointing out the actual main villain oriented episodes out of 22 episodes in the whole season. You know what I mean. There's only like several key episodes that really highlight those episodes, and I just feel with Bloodwork we really got a lot of that in a short space of time, which is just a lot more interesting to follow. Also, now we can look back on it already, Bloodwork was also handled fairly well. His story was interesting enough, his drive and motivation and acquisition of powers made sense, and what he brought to the show and his plot of which Barry was up against in saving Central City and the world from Bloodwork infected people was entertaining. However, this is also where it falls short a bit, at least for me. This villain and his story in season 6 just isn't in my books comparable of the entertainment improvement we got from the other villains in a ranking perspective. Maybe this is just personal preference because I don't really think there's all that much inherently wrong with Bloodwork, and I acknowledge that some may even find the Thinker should have this spot in number 4, but unfortunately I just didn't find Bloodwork as a villain or story as interesting when comparing them side by side as Clifford DeVoe's, which leads me on to number 3, the Thinker. So Clifford DeVoe, aka the Thinker, yet another interesting choice I feel here, because for some, this villain, and I remember when it was announced, in comparison to the others, felt to fans almost boring in comparison to a speedster. And talking about speedsters, I would have wanted to put someone like Sabotar above him if things were handled much differently for that character. However, the fact of the matter is that Season 4's villain was executed overall much better and was definitely an improvement on Season 3. Albeit that I wasn't a huge fan of the tone of Season 4. Now, having said that, I wasn't the biggest fan of when Season 4 got to the point of where the Thinker was hopping around different bodies, because I personally felt as though Neil Sunderland's portrayed an excellent Clifford DeVoe, and he really did hold his own in the season that, for the first time, an apprehension of many, didn't consist of that of a speedster, and that's exactly what this season needed. But then again, as I said, they did take a lot of the screen time away from us from the Neil version of the Thinker. So not only was this season's villain just, very good in terms of on-screen performance, which is always, of course, a big box ticker when it comes to the ranking, because if you're just going to act like Chris Klein's Cicada, then that just doesn't really captivate me nearly as much. But he was also something fresh for the show. A non-speedster, a villain that could rival Barry Allen but also be faster than him, intellectually speaking that is. And you could also point out in a similar sense that the same goes for Bloodwork, being an interesting non-speedster villain, but for me, with what rivalry there was between Clifford DeVoe and the Flash in Season 4, it stands out a lot more entertaining than what Barry and Bloodwork's heads were knocking into each other about during Season 6. So in my mind, it's somewhat a bit of a no-brainer as to why Clifford DeVoe is here, without going into a full breakdown of the season as to why he ranks higher than Cicada and then Sabotar and even Bloodwork. Things were far from perfect with DeVoe at times as well, especially in the way that he was just unplugged from his wife at the end, but overall, his villain also provided a lot more interesting story that did keep me entertained without smarting Barry, portraying Barry as this person harassing this frail man. He even got him wound up in jail and framed for DeVoe's murder. It was just a much better and executed villain and villainous plot than what we've had with the aforementioned villains. So number 2, guys, is it Eobard Thawne or is it Zoomy Woomy Woomy? Well, it's Zoom. Now this was hard to choose because I do feel as though when it comes to Zoom versus Eobard Thawne fighting for the number 1 spot in this ranking video, they do come very close, as they were both fantastic villains for the Flash series. Zoom, I think it goes without saying, was just brilliant. Teddy Sears gave us a very intimidating and menacing performance from Hunter Zolomon, and in some areas, his presence as a villain felt more imposing than that of the Reverse Flash, as he was sinister from the very get-go. His story, albeit rather simple and straightforward, was also perfectly villainous, because he was just crazy. So villainous to the point of where he got bored of being the villain on Earth 2 and pretended to be a hero, which led many fans to initially be led on to his identity as Jay Garrick. Now, he wanted to be faster than the Flash and take his speed for his own, and he'd go about doing anything to accomplish that, and this brought about some incredible scenes in Season 2 and also some very tragic ones, such as the death of Barry Allen's father, Henry Allen, which is definitely a moment I don't think anyone will forget seeing on screen anytime soon. And even though his story with pretending to be Jay Garrick when really being Zoom echoed a bit of a twist in a similar sense to that of the friendly Harrison Wells of Season 1, and then lo and behold, Reverse Flash, it was still a very solid building block upon the first season's villain, and ultimate villain, I might say, which leads me to number 1, the Reverse Flash. Now come on guys, I mean, I'm sure most of you knew I'd come to this conclusion, but then again, maybe not. I know Zoom is a big one for many people, and despite how awesome Reverse Flash is, I'm sure Zoom still does it just a bit more for some of those fans out there. The reason why for the Flash series that I chose Eobard Thawne to be the best villain is just because I truly feel as though he is. He wasn't just only the Season 1 villain, of which of course was a fantastic story within itself of Wells Eobard creating the Flash so that he could return back to the future, but he has echoed throughout the series ever since, even to the point with yet again for the season 6 cliffhanger that we can't get now because it's ending early on episode 19. He was supposed to be the big surprise cliffhanger for season 6, like yet again, another villainous return. And those echoes throughout the series also provided some fantastic additions to the show, whether they were just small appearances in an episode where Barry traveled back in time to learn more about increasing his speed, or when Nora used to run to the future to speak with him in his cell, to many other little tidbits here and there. The Reverse Flash is always interwoven throughout the Flash TV show's DNA. And that means he's always like this pox upon Barry's skin. Barry will keep scratching, but Thawne never seems to really go away. And of course, the Reverse Flash is Barry's arch nemesis after all, but that's a bit too easy of an answer to give for number one. He's also just been portrayed amazingly by Tom Cavanagh as well as Matt Letcher, to the point of where a lot of fans are genuinely divided on who plays the role best. And I just think it goes without saying that unless you're a Zoom fanatic, the Reverse Flash's story surpasses that of all of the other series villains, that it's almost too hard to top it, and that's why Zoom comes in a close second. But for me, Reverse Flash will always be single-handedly the greatest villain the TV show will ever have. But that is the ranking of my favorite villains in the Flash TV show, guys. So as I said at the very beginning of this video, let me know your thoughts on my ranking, but also let me know your ranking as well. Maybe you felt that Clifford DeVoe should have been earlier, maybe Bloodwork should have been higher. If you enjoyed this extra bonus video of The Flash, guys, leave a like on it as it really does show your support for the channel. If you haven't done so already, check out my trailer breakdown for the Godspeed episode next week, as well as my review of last week's episode of The Flash, on top of maybe even my Stargirl review for those of you who are looking forward to Stargirl, coming out in just 17 days from this video, I think. Depends on when it's going out, but thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you speedsters in the next video. Goodbye.